We're going to kick off with the Border-Gavaskar trophy. A reminder that this is your home of neutral Border-Gavaskar trophy coverage because we want both teams to lose. So total neutrality here. Let's start with setting the scene. Ben, what are we expecting from the India 11? Because there are several big name absentees. We know that Rohit Sharma won't play the first test. We know that Mohammad Shami won't play at least the first few test matches. There's potentially no Shubman Gill. And there are a few blokes who no one had ever heard of a year ago who might be playing the first test match.
Yeah, exactly right. So Rohit's away for the birth of his child. Looks like he might even arrive in Australia during the first test match. But yeah, first test, he's not going to be there, looks like, or he's not going to be there. Shami coming back from injury has made a comeback in the Ranji Trophy now and bowled pretty well, but still not the first test. I think more likely than not at all in this series. And Gill just got hit on the thumb, and that's fractured. So they said they're going to take a call on the morning of the game. So looking at that 11, it looks like they'll put Kerahul up to open alongside Jaiswal, who's in there, and then number 3 will be a guy that you might be familiar with if you manage to stick around to the end of the England series earlier this year, which is Devdutt Padikkal, who he made a really good 60 on debut in that series and had made a lot of A runs. He also made 88 in one of the Australia A v India A games before this series, was sort of a bit of a shootout between a few players. He's now been added to the squad officially. So if you've watched the IPL, you've seen him, but he has his first class record doesn't leap off the page in a way of some of the other India players. I think he's averaging in the mid to high 40s, which is not the level of like Sarfaraz Khan, who took ages to break into the team despite averaging 70s, but he's got this kind of well-rounded A team record for India, which I think means that they like him and see him as a top order option. So he's at 3. 4, 5, you've got Kohli, Pant. It's quite possible that actually it's Drell who rounds out that middle order, who we've seen bat
He's
really
good
nicely
against England.
Yeah, it's possibly might even take the gloves if they want to sort of maximise Pant's focusing on his batting. And I think maybe they think he's possibly a slightly better keeper than him as well. And obviously Pant coming back from this injury, if they want to just ease him in a bit more. And he also just looks like a batting, like a really good batter. And then
Interesting though, only one first class 100.
Yes, yeah. And I mean that's some of the ones further down would give for even that much. That's it gets a bit even more interesting when you get down to sort of the lower order. Like it looks. I mean, there's a lot of sort of reports swirling around from people who watch nets, and I'm sure in your time playing, Butch, there were people who said like this guy's definitely playing when you might have known. No, I don't think he is.
Not happening.
But they I saw someone saying that Ashwin had a knowing look on his face as he left training that suggested he was playing.
Knowing look, yes.
So
the knowing look would probably be, I'm not playing again, am I?
and it wouldn't be like Ashwin to indulge in some mind games. But the guys in the reckoning anyway are they'll pick one spinner who'll be a spinning all-rounder. So one of Jadeja, Ashwin or Sundar, who obviously bowled and batted pretty well in that New Zealand series as everything else kind of crashed down around him. And they might also pick a seam bowling rounder who's this guy Nitish Kumar Reddy, who does not have much of a record to speak of. But
he had a really good IPL.
Yes.
And India crave a seam bowling all-rounder, and he is technically that.
That's exactly it, yeah. And, you saw that. And I guess looking through India's sort of recent history, they were picking Shardul Thakur for a while, despite, him looking like quite a modest cricketer, but the balance he provides to the 11 and the impact of having that kind of profile of player, like he did play, he did win them some matches, even though you look at him on the face of him, it's like, how is this guy in a test in one of the the greatest test teams that India have ever produced, and you've got this sort of like slightly uninspiring seam bowling around it, and yet that would be why they're looking at this, and they see this guy as a prospect for the future, but they have to find one of these guys now as they see it. So that's why he's a decent chance of playing. So Bumrah will be in there, Siraj will be in there. And then there's a few candidates for, like, I guess the 2 seam bowling spots. So Reddy looks pretty likes play, but it's not definite. And there's also Akash Deep, who has played
again
a bit.
Good against England.
Yeah, looks good. Prasid Krishna again looks decent, and I think that's the thing from the last beach tiers. That's where it looked like they had quite a lot of like decent under like level guys who could kind of come in and kind of do a job, sort of rotating around. Like remember then they had Nasiraj and Navdeep Saini as well. And yeah, Harshit Rana is the other one who is like, could possibly be an 8 at a push. Like he's almost in that same sort of profile as Nishkin Reddy. But yeah, it's not I guess it's a more experienced team than that finished the last Border-Gavaskar Trophy in Australia, but is also not going to be the complete star-studded India outfit we have been used to.
But when you hear those names, how much of a chance do you give India? They're potentially going to show a lot of faith in guys who are practically unheard of a year ago, and I know that they had success doing that in 2020, 2021, but does lightning strike twice?
You'd say it's unlikely, wouldn't you? It's still very difficult to sort of to get your head around what they achieved the last time. I mean, the first win, what was that, 2018, 19, was stunning enough. But then to do it under those circumstances, the second time round, having been bowled out for 30, in what was the day-night game, wasn't it, in Adelaide?
Yeah.
And then to come back and win that series with half a team, really, you would imagine that that's unlikely to happen again. Particularly given, just how excited everybody, that it's kind of replaced the Ashes, if you like, for as far as Australia's sort of biggest home Test match series, simply by virtue of the fact that they've lost it twice, and you would imagine, given they're starting in Perth, which of course is very, very unusual. I think that's probably a bit of an insurance policy to make sure that Australia get off to a 1-0 start. So I would say that it's very, very unlikely. However, what we've seen from India over the years, and particularly in Australia, has been this incredible steel to kind of produce their very best when they're A, under the pump, and B, playing against an invincible side at home. So all of that makes it a very exciting prospect. But you've got to say Australia will win it this time. They're winning it this time round, surely.
On playing in Australia, there's quite an interesting panel thing that Ravi Shastri was part of this week, and he was the coach who oversaw both the series wins in Australia previously for India. And he talked about the sort of off-pitch stuff being almost as important as how you perform on the pitch. Like Australia, not just the players, but the media, everyone's going to throw everything they've got at you. Yeah. And you've got to not just hold it, but you've almost got to give it back. How important is that? Because that feels quite, it doesn't feel tangible to me. But he's the expert in winning Australia, and that's what he said.
Well, indeed. But I think one of the things that actually does play out in a way that doesn't anywhere else is how much, if you are of a mind, you mentioned Ashwin and his mind games. If you are of a mind to kind of seed things through the media. In order to sort of, in order to kind of to throw the opposition off the scent, then Australia is the place to do it, because they kind of, that stuff is amplified there in a way that it isn't even here for the Ashes. Always was. So if you're very cognizant of that as a team and as a management, you can manage your team and its expectations and the selections you're going to make and the style that you're going to play by throwing things out there to the media, knowing full well that they will be reported gleefully. And so, I mean, if it's a handy way of they will do it to you, so you may as well do it back, So I think that's pretty smart. How much that then affects what plays out on the field is entirely dependent on how well you play. But I think not being passive in that regard, I think, is a very useful thing. I think, in the two Ashes tours that I played, we were so not in awe. That's probably wrong, but I think we were so sort of downplaying of our chances. It was all about, we're going to compete and we're going to do this and hopefully only lose 3 tests or whatever it might be. That was always the vibe, was very downplay everything. But I think if you're going out there, particularly having won twice in the last 2 series, I think you can go out there and be a lot more boisterous than that, and kind of throw a few spanners in the works, throw a few red herrings out there, the whole thing, and that kind of plays really nicely into sort of like the mischievousness of the Indian cricket team, and their management is just as likely to be in front of the press, having a massive pop at the opposition as the Aussie ones are. And that's part of what makes it so mouthwatering.
Probably more likely nowadays, actually, given the way Australia go about things.
Absolutely.
Ben, when you go through your predicted or likely 11 with India there is still, in the year 2024, questions about whether or not Ashwin's going to play an overseas test match. To me, it is mad that he plays so few games outside Asia. He's played 6 games in the last 3.5 years. He's got a good recent record in Australia. He was very good there 4 years ago. Jadeja also has a good record in Australia. And what am I getting wrong? I sort of think you pick Jadeja because he's in your top 7 batters, and then you pick Ashwin because he's in your best 4 bowlers. And those two conversations are sort of separate. Because if you're picking Reddy, in theory at 8, as your containing 4-seamer, surely Ashwin's going to do a better containing job than a rookie seamer who has barely played first-class cricket.
I guess so, but then they would just look back to some of the things that Shardul Thakur somehow did in a Test shirt. Taking 7th for in South Africa, and I think they basically do see it that if you have some sort of jobbing seamer who can bat at 8, then actually that just is more useful, especially when you have a guy who does bowl brilliant containing spin in the top 6 as well. So I think it is obviously, and I think a lot of these things also will have been close calls, which is why Ashwin has come into the team at times overseas, because they do appreciate the qualities that he has, obviously. But I think it just does make it a marginal call, and they have also had that they feel that formula has worked to this India team they haven't quite got the series results they would have wanted to in England and South Africa. Obviously, they got the ones in Australia, but they haven't quite got those. But still, they've been the most competitive Indian side in those conditions ever. So they would say that might, to an extent, vindicate that general decision that they've taken. I mean, I sort of agree with you that it is mad. I'm trying to think about how India would see it, but yeah.
Well, I'd throw something at you in terms of that sort of the manipulation of the potential thinking of your opposition by dint of saying things in the media. Steve Smith was quoted as saying, he basically in Australia, he thinks that off-spin just is there to be smashed. Why would you say something like that unless you were slightly concerned they might play Ash? You know what I mean? It's kind of that whole thing that was crystallised. The whole nonsense I was talking about before was crystallised. It just popped into my head. He said those were his words. Off-spin. Just in Australia, you just smash the crap out of it. It's useless, completely a waste of time. Now, would you say that if they if they didn't have Ashwin in the other side and you weren't slightly concerned about what he might be able to do should they decide to pick him? Given simply because a holding bowler that can only hold is nowhere near as useful as a holding bowler who then might be able to win you a game should the conditions change later on. So, you get 3 players for the price of 2 in that way. But we'll see. I mean, Perth has not exactly been the spin bowling haven for the world, so we might have this conversation again as we move on to the next one.
Well, I guess the other thing is Australia, 3 left-handers in their top 7, so it's not just a containing thing, and also it's the identity of those left-handers. Usman Khawaja, he's got a good recent record. Head's had a quiet year, but outstanding 2023, and actually ridiculously for England fans perhaps, but their in-form player is Alex Carey. Alex Carey is the guy who's got the most runs in the Shield. He had a brilliant last Test match in New Zealand. So he is someone who a lot of people are picking as potentially one of the key players in the series. But a couple of your former captains have written columns in the last few days about comparing the Ashes to the Border-Gavaskar Trophy series and seeing which one's bigger than the other. Did you have a view on this? Obviously, it's
not
slightly
really.
nonsense conversation.
The thing is, who cares? It's kind of it's one of those things. It's a bit like the special relationship between the UK and America. It's one of those that we like to talk about to big ourselves up in some ways in comparison to the rest of the world. When in essence, India having won there twice in the space of 5 years, as opposed to England's once since what between 86, 87 and 2010, 11. It makes it more competitive. And listen, the Australian public, being the contrary beings that they are, quite like seeing Australia lose. So for them, India coming is they kind of write us off as saying, well, we're not going to beat England, never win here. But India have done it twice in living memory. Therefore, we got a big series on our hand. Therefore, it's bigger than the Ashes.
Well, I mean,
but who cares?
England's last Test win in Australia is almost old enough to drink, so you can understand why. You can understand.
Well, I mean, there you go. So I mean, that's I think that's it, and it's entirely justified. And it's a great thing for the Test match game overall that it should have equal, if not better, billing than that. We'll see. Come this time at the end of next year, then they'll be talking this one up. So.
Yeah. I don't really understand how you define what has bigger billing. Like what are the metrics? I mean, more people are going to be watching this because there's 1 billion people in India. But
there you have it.
And how do you measure Oz interest? Really difficult to do. But the one thing you can say is that, yeah, as much as you look at the on-field action, like this has been the unmissable series. And actually, even when they play in India, to be honest, I mean, until New Zealand, that was, you know, knowing England kind of nicked a couple tests over there, but that felt like the closest series that were played, especially that 2016-17 BGT. But even the last one when Australia went there, I saw someone pointing out that if you flip round the results in that series, that's an all-time classical series, like a sort of a border or start with Australia sort of get the first and low score, and then India would come back to win it, rather than India, like it was obviously they won the first two with Australia having their moments, and then Australia come back into it, but that was still like a kind of a competitive ish all the way through, basically. So I think that just because they're the two best teams in the world over the last decade, that like on it, what would I most like to watch? It's that one.
The reason why I'm really excited for this series, I think it's quite hard to predict because so few players from either side are in any sort of nick. So because it's hard to predict, whatever happens, I think will be box office. So if one team runs away from it, it's potentially the end of an era for a great side, either way, or it's a really exciting series. I think whatever unfolds, I think will be great to watch. And just on Australia, we've known their 11 for a week, basically. It's going to be Khawaja, Nathan McSweeney, the debutant, 25 years old, normally bats 3 or 4 for South Australia, captain of Australia A, Labuschagne, Smith, Head, Marsh, Carey, Cummins, Stark, Lyon and Hazelwood. What might be quite interesting in this series is if you go back to the last two series that India won in Australia, one of their key players was Pujara. Pujara was player of the series in 18-19, and although he only averaged 33 last time, faced millions of balls. So we saw the big three seamers sort of wane as the series played out. Australia don't have Cam Green. Mitch Marsh has barely bowled since doing his hamstring earlier in the year. So we might genuinely see quite a lot of Marnus Labuschagne seam. When he captains himself, he bowls a lot of it. It'll be interesting to see if Pat Cummins uses seam the same way.
And sorry, because you just mentioned like end of an era if a team loses, but it kind of for both the sides, it's just massive for the legacy of either side, kind of whichever happens. Like if this Australia team, which is kind of stacked full of greats, kind of goes through their cycle without having beaten India at home, or without having beaten India in any test series, that's a big black mark. And then for India, especially for Kohli, I guess, like, okay, there was 2018-19, but I think you might put like half an asterisk next to that because of the guys who are missing for Australia.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, and then 2020-21, where he only plays the first test. So actually, if he wants to have a statement, like a series win that is kind of unimpeachable in Australia, this is his last chance as well. And then that's actually his only chance, or could be his last chance. I guess he's got England next year as well. But for actually then a statement series win in, you know, the countries where India have struggled, I guess England, Australia, South Africa. So it's big for all those guys who won't get another chance like this.